We start our comprehensive look at Gaza tonight by focusing on the state of hospitals there. Unusually, we're not showing you a full report because there are so few pictures today. The internet is subject to frequent blackouts, and we are, of course, barred access to the Gaza Strip. But news does trickle out. The World Health Organization says that Gaza's second biggest hospital, which Israeli forces stormed on Thursday, is no longer functional. Some 200 patients are still in the Nasser hospital in Khan Younis, but 8 have reportedly died from a lack of oxygen, and sewage is flooding emergency rooms. Israel has been searching the complex for the bodies of hostages they believe were held there by Hamas. And the Palestinian Red Crescent Society is warning that the Al-Amal Hospital in Khan Younis could also be out of service soon. It has been under siege for weeks. Well, earlier I spoke to Nabal Farsak, who's a spokesperson for the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. I began by asking her to paint us a picture of what healthcare is like in Gaza.
Healthcare in Gaza is catastrophic, is dire. Most hospitals went out of service. Those hospitals who are still operating, they are working partially. They barely can't provide life-saving services. You can see wounded people, injured people, bleeding on the ground in hospitals corridor because there's no spaces in hospitals. Hospitals are completely overwhelmed. On top of that, all of them are lacking medical supplies, medicines, and very basic supply. They can't even take care of other patients. They barely can save the lives of those who have been injured because of direct bombings.
If you are wounded today in the Gaza Strip, and you go to one of these hospitals that are barely functioning, what are your chances of survival?
Basically, many wounded people lost their lives because they were not provided with medical services. Now, doctors have to make very tough decisions, even to choosing between patients and those who have been injured, to choose who have a high chance of being alive. The scene of people bleeding on the hospital's corridors for hours is just the norm now in those hospitals who are still operating, since most hospitals went out of service.
Can you just bring us up to date with the situation at Nasser Hospital in Gaza, the second biggest hospital in the Strip?
The situation at Nasser Hospital is dire. 8 patients were died because of the electrical generator stopped and the carrying of oxygen. Inside the hospital, there is around 200 patients. 20 of them are in critical conditions, and they need to be transferred to continue treatment outside of the hospital. A large number of medical staff were detained by the Israeli occupation forces. Only a couple of doctors are still there to take care of the patient. The Palestinian Red Crescent runs Al-Amal Hospital, which is also in Khan Younis, and it faced the same conditions. Today, Israeli occupation forces target the 4th floor of the hospital.
The Israelis say that they're targeting some of the hospitals, including Al-Amal Hospital, which is under your control, because they believe that medical staff there have been hiding the hostages in cahoots with Hamas. Is that true?
Last week, Israeli occupation forces raided Al-Amal Hospital. They destroyed medical equipment inside the hospital, and they beat the medical staff, beating them and dehumanized them. After the raid, almost 18 people were arrested. All of them are medical workers, PRCS members, in addition to wounded people and their companions. And later on, Israeli occupation forces claimed they arrested fighters from inside the hospital, which is absolutely not true. We are now completely very concerned regarding the safety of our PRCS members who are still under arrest.
I hear what you're saying, and absolutely they should be protected, but were any of them involved in the holding of the Israeli hostages?
All of the people who were arrested from inside the hospital are doctors and PRCS members. None of them is engaged in any kind of fighting. Israel are just using claims in order to justify their attacks against hospitals.
I'm going to leave it there. Nabal Farsak, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, we approached the Israeli Defense Force for a response to those claims, but did not receive one before we came on air. For months now, domestic politics has been unable to escape Gaza, especially when it comes to the issue of a ceasefire. But the language has evolved. So Keir Starmer is now calling for a ceasefire that lasts and must happen now, while Scottish Labour passed a motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. A small difference in language, perhaps, masking suggestions of a rift. From Glasgow, our Scotland correspondent Catherine Sampson has this report.
Leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer.
Security was tight as Keir Starmer was welcomed to Scottish Labour's conference in Glasgow. All weekend, pressure's been mounting over his position on Gaza. If he'd arrived here yesterday, this is what would have greeted him outside the venue. Crowds of pro-Palestine supporters calling for an immediate ceasefire. This afternoon, fresh from a gathering of senior politicians in Munich, Keir Starmer said every conversation there had focused on what could be done to end the crisis.
To deliver what we all want to see, a return of all the hostages taken on October the 7th, an end to the killing of innocent Palestinians, a huge scaling up of humanitarian relief, and an end to the fighting. Not just for now, not just for a pause, but permanently. A ceasefire that lasts, conference, that is what must happen now. The fighting must stop now.
There was a warm reception in the hall here for Keir Starmer today. He is battling to convince voters in Scotland to pick Labour over the SNP, but he's also battling to keep party unity as the SNP push for a vote on an immediate ceasefire in the Commons on Wednesday. Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar described that SNP motion as perfectly reasonable. Scottish Labour unanimously backed an immediate ceasefire at conference yesterday. So did delegates here think Keir Starmer said enough?
I think it's about time. I think it's a bit late. From the outset, we should have been calling for a ceasefire. The unimaginable toll that's been put on the Palestinian people, and I think he's joined the party. The Scottish Labour Party obviously voted for the motion yesterday, and it's good to see Keir following suit.
Know where he stood before on this, and at this stage I still think it's not enough. I don't like agreeing with SNP very much, right enough to be honest with you, but I agree that the ceasefire should take place and it should happen now, immediately.
And Labour MPs should vote for that motion on Wednesday?
Absolutely, 100%.
In a previous vote on Gaza last November, Keir Starmer's decision to favour a humanitarian pause led to several frontbench resignations. The SNP's Westminster leader is offering a meeting with him to discuss Wednesday's motion before MPs are asked to vote.
We haven't looked at the detail of the motion on Wednesday.
The motion's been published since Wednesday last week.
But there's still an opportunity.
I can show you it on my phone.
There's still an opportunity there for Stephen Flynn to respond to what we've asked for, which is for him to get round the table and work out a way that we can get all parties in the House of Commons to support something. So there is one voice speaking about how much we want the fighting stopped.
Do you think there's a risk that voters see Keir Starmer being bounced into this by either Scottish Labour or the SNP?
Keir Starmer's been pretty consistent on this all the way through.
Has he? There's been multiple positions, haven't there not?
He's always wanted to find a way of stopping the war, he's always wanted to find a way of getting that ceasefire together, but it's got to be about process. Keir's always said, you've got to have a bilateral ceasefire here, there's got to be a diplomatic and political way through this. We thought the humanitarian pauses might be the catalyst for bringing something more permanent. It wasn't. We're now seeing this, what's happening in Rafah. It's completely and utterly unacceptable.
We'll keep the red flag.
Scottish Labour spent the weekend playing down any discord with the UK leadership over Gaza, but the next few days could still prove difficult.